Now, you may do all that's in your power to save that job, but given the current crisis, it's always a possibility, irrespective of how good your performance is. If you do end up losing your job and the employer lets you go with the severance package, what does that mean for you? You may think you have enough to sustain yourself for the next few months with that settlement that your company pays you, but don't forget that even the severance pay is taxable in the hands of the employee as profit in lieu of salary under Section 17(3) of the Income Tax Act. Now, to get more detail on that and to give us, I think, a layman's term of how all of this works, I'm joined now by a senior tax attorney, Darren Britz, from Remuneration Specialists. Thank you so much for joining me, Darren.
Thanks, Mitra. Thanks for having me.
So maybe let's just unpack, firstly, the severance package, how that is calculated. What is it different for each person depending on how long you've worked?
Yeah, I think it's important to understand, Sumitra, that there's generally two groupings of amounts you'll see on that severance package. The first is amounts that you are entitled to just based on the work you've already done for that employer. So that might be some salary that's due to you, your leave pay. There might be a notice pay in your contract that says, when you leave, you have to pay you out 2 months' notice. It might be a bit of a bonus pro rata you're entitled to, if there's a bonus scheme in your company. Then there's a second amount, the amount that we all kind of hear about, which is called severance. And that's generally mandated by the Labour Relations Act.
But whatever it is, you're getting a bit of money at the end of your working time. If you've been told to leave in the next 2 months, at the end of the 2 months, you get this package, and then you're told that you will no longer be needed. How does this then get paid out to you?
Yeah, no, good question. Again, it depends on the amounts that are being paid. So for example, your ordinary amounts that are due to you, your salary, your leave pay, and that kind of thing, that is paid by your employer in the ordinary course of the payroll, just like they would do your salary at the end of the month or the 25th of the month. That portion that's the severance amount, that gets the additional tax break, that's a little bit different and a bit more complicated. There, the employer has to basically engage SARS first. They have to go through what's called a directive process. So they make an application to SARS, they confirm that it is a retrenchment, they tick the right boxes, and they exactly say how much they're going to pay the employee. And SARS will then come back and explain how much tax that employer must withhold on that severance amount. And once that employer is comfortable, they understand the tax obligations, they will make that payment to that employee on a date they agree with that employee.
So is there any set formula, or is it on a case-by-case basis when you have this discussion with SARS?
Well, really the question becomes, is it severance?
Mm-hmm.
So for example, in the media, we've heard about guys who leave a company on a mutual separation basis. Sometimes we hear about this golden handshake, I think the media often call it,
Mm-hmm.
And an amount like that, for example, is not severance. Severance really is a very small group of employees. It's guys who've been, terminated because the company's either closing down, or they simply can't afford to pay that employee, or that a position becomes redundant. Very different from a termination because, I want to go. It's past my agreement, But typically on the tax is the same when it comes to that severance amount. So it just comes down to how much you get paid will determine how much tax that you end up paying,
Okay. And then, you talk about the difference between a golden handshake and then you have the severance package. You also get a voluntary severance package. How does that work?
Yeah, correct. And that's quite an interesting point we often deal with in our firm, A few years back, SARS took the view that a voluntary retrenchment doesn't have the same tax as an involuntary retrenchment. For that exact reason, they were trying to stop guys using it to get favorable tax when they just simply terminate an agreement and pay a guy an amount of money, Fortunately, in around 2018, a number of us in the tax community made representations to SARS to say, you've actually got this completely wrong. There is such a thing as a voluntary retrenchment, which is the same thing as an involuntary retrenchment, or rather it has the same tax treatment. It's just a case of the process is a little bit different, Both of them are governed by the Labour Relations Act. In both cases, you send a notice to your employees. The only difference is on the voluntary, it's a bit quicker, So you ask the question first, is there anybody who does want to go first,
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to follow that LIFO process and all the strict requirements of the Labour Relations Act. But if you can show there's a bona fide voluntary retrenchment, it's still a retrenchment, and the severance amount you get, whether it's at 1 week per year or whether it's a little bit more, which often happens on voluntary, often it's one of the reasons the guy will put up his hand first, because the employer might say, listen, I'll pay you guys a little bit more, if you can go first. But yeah, those amounts are still entitled to that tax on severance, that 500,000 tax-free amount we like to speak about.
Okay, so essentially it doesn't change anything in terms of the taxes, but it does if you decide, if the company gives you an option to take a voluntary severance package, the whole process moves a lot quicker. Am I right?
Yeah, correct. So from a tax perspective, the main difference would be on that directive form the employer fills in, you would tick a different box. That's really the main difference from a tax perspective. But you're right. From a employer perspective or a retrenchment perspective, it's just far easier to go that route, we know of some employees that they might even be aware they can get another job. So if they're really shrewd, they might even volunteer, go through a retrenchment process, get a little bit more money, on that voluntary retrenchment, get a tax break, and then they've got a job lined up perhaps in the next few months. That would be the ideal situation. Doesn't often happen, but that would be the perfect situation for an employee,
Afropolitans, my guest this evening is Darren Britz. He's an attorney with Remuneration Consultants, and he's talking us through all of the consequences, tax consequences included on severance packages, how they work. If you have any questions for him, please give us a call on 0800959. We've got Darren on the line, and he'll answer any of your questions. Darren, coming back to you, looking at the fact that it moves quicker, how long does this whole process start? So I do know that you need to actually apply to certain rules in the Labor Relations Act if you decide to go on a route of a retrenchment process. How long does the whole thing take from when you start till when you complete?
Yeah, unfortunately, I normally get involved quite late in the process, So I normally get involved just on that tax side. So by the time your labor attorney or your HR has already sent the initial notice, they've had the initial meetings with all the staff, that normally takes a week or two. You then need to discuss alternatives to retrenchment to see if you can find another place of work for them or salary cuts, etc. Only once that employer makes the decision they're going to start retrenching and they come to the point where they negotiate that package, do I normally get involved, I've seen very quick retrenchments, especially if you can do it on a voluntary basis and you can get that first notice out, and especially if it's a smaller company, so under 100 employees, a lot easier and quicker. Retrenchment can happen, within a month. For larger companies, they have stricter requirements under the Labor Relations Act. Obviously, companies that have unions, where those employees are represented by unions, can take far longer because there may be a negotiation involved, especially if they want to go through a voluntary retrenchment. And remember, when it comes to making alternative arrangements before retrenchment, the unions will always push back. They'll say, why not pay cuts first? Why not rotate those jobs around first? Make other arrangements, please. Don't just leave these guys destitute, Retrenchment really should be a last resort from an employee perspective, if I can say that.
Is there any reason for companies to drag this out? If you say it can happen in a month?
Not at all. I think that if it gets dragged out, it's more likely going to be either for uncertainty from the employee's perspective. Perhaps they just want to see in the next month or two how much income will they really have. It's a fine line between keeping an employee, going through a pay cut and having to terminate that employee. It might be a matter of a couple $1,000 rand, that honestly makes that decision for that employer. So an employer is less likely to drag it out unless it comes down to uncertainty for the future. If it takes a bit longer, it might be that the negotiation's taking long, especially on a voluntary retrenchment. We've seen cases where that employer makes an offer to that employee, only for that employer to receive a lawyer's letter back. That employee went and sought counsel, got advice, and they've been told, listen, you can actually push back, you can negotiate a little bit here. We think that this employer actually just wants to get rid of you for whatever reason. And it's actually tougher for them to go through involuntary retrenchment, Use this opportunity to push back a bit, negotiate a higher payout. And as soon as that happens, we know if employers get involved, it can take a lot longer,
So if you start this process, then if a staff member has been told you are in the running, or you have been listed as one of the possible employees to get a severance package, they then can take that notice, go to a lawyer and say, this is how much they're offering me, I don't agree, and then you can negotiate on the amount that you're getting paid. Or do you go to fight the case so that you are reinstated as opposed to being retrenched?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question, The CCMA, I can tell you now, are inundated with cases, especially now during COVID-19, I mean, really, they're encouraging employers and employees to resolve their differences behind closed doors, enter into an agreement. I mean, we know the CCMA will often put a little bit of pressure on an employer to perhaps up that offer, pay a little bit more just to ensure there's not a dispute, So I definitely think in this climate, employees they shouldn't be encouraged to dispute, the issues of the employer or leave on acrimonious terms. But at the same time, on a retrenchment, I mean, you've got to understand that might be the last money that employee sees for a long time, So especially if it's going to come down to a voluntary retrenchment, you can, I wouldn't say push back, but you can ask for a bit more. But remember, nothing prevents that employer from then reinstating the involuntary retrenchment process. You can say, okay, well, if no one's going to raise their hand or we can't come to terms, then I'm going to complete the involuntary retrenchment process. And in terms of that, other than the amounts already accrued, that employer only needs to pay you 1 week for every completed year of service. So if that employer is offering you, 4 weeks pay, and you've only been with that employer for 2 years, at that stage, you might just want to accept that. You probably don't want to push back, but it comes down to your bargaining power. It comes down to how much you're aware of this employer's, requirements.
That's so interesting, Darren. I'd like to explore that a little bit more, what you're saying. So that can actually affect the amount that you're talking about. So if you do give all your employees an opportunity to take up the voluntary package and nobody's taking it up, then you start an involuntary process where a whole list of people are put forward and they are getting retrenched whether they like it or not. This could affect the amount that was on the table prior?
Of course, And again, remember, the statutory requirement is 1 week for every completed year of continuous service, So you got to ask yourself, what motivates an employer to pay more than that 1 week? The two reasons would be, well, if I pay a bit more, hopefully, the right employees put up their hand, and it makes sense. There might be some employees that are, better positioned for their role than others.
Yeah.
But in terms of the retention process, unfortunately, they have to be the first to go.
Okay. So this goes back to when you were saying that there's a slight incentive. If you decide to do it quickly and you take it, then they would agree to pay you a little bit extra. But if it becomes an involuntary process, we hardline.
Exactly right. 100% right there.
Darren, hold on. We've got a call from Lisa in Soweto. Lisa was retrenched 2 weeks ago and was given a retrenchment package of 2 weeks. But when this was paid out, it didn't reflect the amount agreed upon. Lisa, a very good evening to you. Thanks for calling in. I've put your question through to Darren. He's on the line. Darren, do you want to take it from there? I think what she's asking is, why was the amount agreed upon not reflected in her account?
Yeah, and I think that's very common. Oh, hi, Lisa.
Hi, I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Yes, very well.
Yes, the thing is that I have been retrenched at my working place 2 weeks back, and then as I've heard when you were explaining that, because it was a voluntary retrenchment, so they basically told us that the company is closing down because it's no longer making money and so forth. So I took a voluntary retrenchment, and then the only money that we agreed on there, they told me that they're going to pay me for the 2 weeks. And then I'm also going to get my basic salary. But now as the money has reflected today, it's only the basic salary and an extra amount, but it's not what we agreed on.
And have you communicated to your employer yet that you believe there's an amount less than what was agreed?
Yes, what I did today is that asked them to send me my pay because I wanted to know what actual amount will reflect on my account. And then they told me that I'm not going to get a pay slip today. I'll get it only tomorrow.
Yeah, I think definitely await the pay slip. And I think if I was you, I'd also ask for a copy of the directive, which they applied for on your severance amount. Did you agree?
Okay.
Did you prepare a little written agreement with your employer? Do you have your terms in writing?
Yes, I have a contract with me. I have what they have written down, the severance package that they promised me in writing.
Okay, so I'll definitely, I don't think you need to involve a lawyer on something like this. You can communicate to your employer on email. You can attach a copy of your agreement. In your email, you can kind of screenshot or show them the amounts that you agreed on. And then what you should do then is attach a copy of your bank statement or a screenshot from your bank statement and simply show them there's a difference between what is on my contract and what is in my account. Please, can you just let me know why this is the case? Remember, you don't want to fight too early, because there could be a very good reason for that. It may be a tax reason, as an example. So the real way to do it would be to show them your agreement. Very good, you've got that. Show them the amount in your bank account. Ask them for a copy of the payslip. Ask them for a copy of the tax directive. And then you're right. Just very calmly put the question to them. Then please explain.
Okay. The other thing that I wanted to ask, since Gwel have taken a voluntary retrenchment, so what happens to my leave days? So they're supposed to pay for my leave days or what?
Correct. So they should be paying you your salary, your leave days, and anything else you're entitled to. Maybe there's a bit of notice pay or something like that. That they will withhold tax like they normally do on your salary. The severance amount is a little bit different. Have you, in your past, ever received a retirement amount, or have you ever received an amount on a retrenchment before?
No, this was the first time.
Okay, so if you've never received a retirement benefit before and you've never received any retrenchment, this is your first retrenchment. And it's a voluntary retrenchment, they can show they did the process correctly. And they then also did the SARS process correctly. There should be no tax on those 2 weeks they pay you. So they paid you, which I'm guessing that's the severance amount. That amount shouldn't have tax on it. Obviously, it might vary. I've not seen that agreement you've signed. But typically, if they're saying that we're paying you these 2 weeks on top of everything else we're paying you, and they say that this is for the retrenchment, those 2 weeks should be tax-free.
But Lisa, just for clarity, you said that you got your basic salary.
Yes, I got my basic salary, and then the only thing that didn't reflect well is the severance package.
The severance, the 2 weeks.
Yeah, the 2 week severance package is not adding up to what I've received. It's not adding up at all.
So Darren, that's what's missing. So maybe, does that mean that that's still coming?
It could be a timing issue, but I mean, it sounds like they've not been great in the communication. I mean, at least put an agreement together. So I have more hope in this employer than others, perhaps, But you're right, the communication needs to be perhaps a bit better.
Lisa?
The fact that she's uncertain,
Yeah. So, Lisa, I think it's great that you have a directive on the agreed amount, as Darren was talking about. So you have an agreement that you have on paper. Do everything on email so you have a paper trail, and make sure that you are very clear on what it is that you're asking for. So, Darren, I don't know if you agree, but my suggestion is that Lisa sends them an email with the directive, as you were talking about, the agreement. Put it on there and ask them, please, can you clarify for me, this is my salary, this is the amount, including my leave days and the rest that's owed to me. But I am not seeing the 2 weeks severance that we agreed upon. Please, can you advise if this is still coming? So you firm, but you are and you direct, and you're still being polite. You'd like to know, so don't leave it, but I suggest you send the email so that you know exactly where you stand. So it's either they come back to you and say it's still coming in the next few days, or there is an issue here.
Yeah, I like that approach. That's great.
The other question that I have is that the company has applied the UIF chase for the employees. They applied it in April. So when I checked online, it shows that the money was paid to the company on the 3rd of May. And then other employees have received it, and then I also didn't receive it as well.
So that's the COVID-19 TERS scheme, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
So if they paid it to the company on the 3rd of May, it should have been paid over to you immediately.
Yeah, but I haven't received it because some of my colleagues that I've been communicating with, some of them have received it today. So,
Darren, should she include this in the email as well? I think she should.
I think so. I mean, you could do 2 separate emails, but I think definitely a single email, nicely stated, and you can even have 2 headings. First point, please, retrenchment question. Second point, UIF question. Because I agree with you, especially if you know the employees who received that money. I mean, I suppose you're not certain for which employees they've applied for, I guess, so it could be that they've received money for certain employees and not received for others. So again, I agree with Sumitra's approach, firm but polite in your email. You say exactly that. I understand that some colleagues of mine have received this, but I have not. Please, can you let me know when will I receive my money,
Be clear, Lisa, in your email. Make sure you detail everything, because later on, if this does become a problem, all of those emails and that communication can be used. For your own sake, it's very important for you to have a paper trail to show that you have had communication and you have been asking about everything.